Starting 502 Podcast. Pretty much nothing to talk about this week, so should be pretty fast, Jake. I'm just kidding. Starting 502 Podcast brought to you by Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon. As I suggested, Jake Cook is the man on the other end today. Jake, are you surviving the gloomy weather right now?
I am, thankfully, with enough Louisville Twitter and Louisville Sports Radio. I'm able to make it by because this is like the most entertaining Louisville basketball has been in the last 2 years, at least,
Yeah,
since we were searching for KP.
These are the days that the media lives for, right? Like you need these controversies. You need, like I saw, I know they have a consistent following on the radio, but when you see a radio station that has a YouTube channel that has a consistent like 1.2 thousand people for over an hour at like 11 o'clock at night on a stream, you have a fan base that's hungry for some content. So that's what we're going to do here tonight. We're not going to talk about a lot of basketball because there's not really, what else is there to say? We have senior day coming up, but again, we won't really get into the logistics of that. It looks like JJ Traynor will be honored for senior day. Any thoughts on that as far as, do you think that we'll see him come back? Do you think this is because they know that Kenny's on the way out and so it could be kind of a volatile situation? What's your take on that?
That's what I'm guessing. I'm guessing he's still probably weighing his options, or maybe he has already decided he's going to hit the transfer portal, but it definitely doesn't lend itself to being positive news that he's going to stay. Because if he knew he was going to stay, then he'd be like, no, my senior night's going to be next year. We're good. So either way, JJ's been great. He's been through so much. He's stuck with Louisville through so much. So I know his career hasn't been, at least from a team success point, as great as he probably expected, but JJ will always be a Cardinal, and I'll always remember him favorably.
Yeah, man. I mean, there is this kind of, I don't want to say negativity surrounding his career, but it feels like it's been an incomplete career. He started off during the COVID year. If you remember, Louisville didn't really have a de facto center that season. And so JJ and Jalen Withers kind of took over at that center position. And that was just an odd season all around because of COVID, because of the scheduling, everything else that went into it. Louisville just barely misses the tournament, and that kind of starts like what's been just like a kind of 3 to 4 year downward spiral with, Chris Mack leaving the season after, the whole situation with Dino Gaudio. It's just been a mess. And JJ's been here through all of that. And every single season that he's been here has been plagued by injuries, every single season. But when he's played, the one thing that you can say about JJ Traynor is that he's always brought what Louisville fans want. He's brought like a hungry, humble attitude. You never see him getting too high or too low. He has executed in key moments. He's brought big plays. He's brought exciting plays on that 2020 team. I remember there's a big, not a controversy necessarily, but like a whole to do about, that was the least amount of dunks that a Louisville team had ever had. They played very below the rim. And JJ was the guy, he was the only guy getting dunks. And that's kind of been his whole career at Louisville. I put together just like that little highlight package, and every highlight of JJ Traynor is just him having some like crazy athletic dunk. Like he makes it look like it's not super athletic just because he's so tall, long, lean, nimble, if you will. But, he really had an exciting career here. He had some exciting moments. He had some game-winning field goals, even during the Kenny Payne era. So he was always a fun guy to watch. He's always a guy that you felt like he came to Louisville because of what it meant to him. His father played at Louisville. His coach in high school, Boo Brewer, has, strong connections with Louisville as well. So, I can't say enough good things about JJ. Ultimately, though, we talked about, what players would you want to keep from this team? We never mentioned JJ's name. I think there is a reason behind that. I think that, part of it to me is like, if he does stay in college, I'd like to see him go somewhere where like he can really have success and where he's really a good fit. It's never really felt like he's found his fit at Louisville. He feels like a good cultural fit, but as far as the way he plays, maybe not a great fit. What's your take on that? Like if we went back and redid that conversation, would you include JJ Traynor at all?
Yeah, I think if we went back, wasn't even purposely not including him. I just honestly, he hasn't played in so long, he's almost forgotten about. And part of me does think that he's been in college for so long and it's been such a struggle to have team success that it wouldn't surprise me at all if he decided, hey, let me go to Creighton, let me go to Marquette, let me go to Texas, somewhere where he can finally have team success that he deserves. But I mean, I think he'd be behind Brandon. He'd be behind Ty Lore. but like right up with Caleb's younger. So I think I'd rather keep him just because the potential for 3 to 4 more years with him. But I mean, I'd put him right behind Caleb as a guy that I'd want to see return. And I think he could be a really valuable piece to a team that transforms almost completely. So I would love to welcome JJ back for his 5th year, but I wouldn't hold out hope that that's going to happen, especially since he's going to his senior night.
Right, right. And you know, we're talking about senior nights, and it gets very confusing for people out there that don't know. There's a very high likelihood, given his injury history, given the COVID year, he should have another year of eligibility. And, you know, a lot of these guys are squeezing 2 years of eligibility out of this somehow. So he could very well go somewhere and be very productive. He could stay at Louisville and be productive. I mean, when you look at his stats at the end of last year, he was averaging over 11 points. I believe it was 6 rebounds, over a block per game in the last 7. When he was finally healthy, he was one of the top 3 most productive teams on that shit show of a team to end last year. And to start this year, he was even better. He was averaging 11 points a game, I believe almost right at 5 rebounds per game. So he was on that same pace to be that same sort of contributor. If he had 11 points per game throughout the season, you know, he'd be one of the leading scorers on this team. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see what the new coaching staff, you know, ultimately thinks about him. I think it's completely dependent on the coaching hire. It's dependent on who they're wanting to keep. Will the next coach want to completely reset? Do they just want to get everybody off the team? Or is it something where they see that there's some foundational pieces? One guy that we didn't even mention the last podcast, and I think that he gets overlooked a lot. And I had some people reach out and, you know, curious about our opinions on this. Mike James. I mean, if you're building around guys for next year's team, if you're with foundational pieces, is Mike James a guy that you would consider, or what are the pros and cons of that?
I think I would consider Mike. I mean, that freshman year, I guess his redshirt freshman year after he tore his Achilles was so impressive. I mean, played with so much energy, attacked the basket really well, hit threes, played intense defense, though maybe not solid defense, but intense defense. But I think since then we've almost seen a regression. I think you tweeted it out. It almost looks like the Monstars took his talents at some point. Like when he was playing against Syracuse, he ended up with a decent stat line, like maybe 14, 16 points, but he was by far the worst player on the floor for a majority of that game. Like he would get in the middle, and it just seems like all he does when he gets the ball, kind of similar to Trey White, just holds on to it for too long, doesn't look to swing the ball, doesn't look to move the ball, and just immediately attacks, puts his head down, and like flails at the basket to try and draw a foul, as opposed to just simply trying to make the layup. He's more interested in trying to draw a foul, which I think worked early on. And now maybe refs are catching on that like this is what he does every time. Coaches are letting him know, but he's definitely less effective than he was his freshman year, even earlier in this year. But a lot of that's kind of hard to judge because the coaching staff is so poor. What can Mike James be with a really great coach like Scott Drew or Nate Oates or whoever it is that comes along? I think that he could be a really good piece. So I would be fine keeping him. Again, not a top 3, 4 guy, probably to keep. But if he did stay, I wouldn't be upset by it at all.
Like if they decide, again, you know, we're not the professionals, so it's ultimately, you know, not our decision. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes is the other thing. You know, but the other feedback that I've heard as well, you know, we're everybody's very high on Tyler, but the reality of the situation from those close to the program, insiders, boosters, whoever is feeding these people information, is that Tyler has not been completely bought in a similar way that what was the guy's name last year with that looked like one of the Island boys. I'm trying to think about it.
Oh, Fabio?
Fabio Basili. You know, I heard a lot on the outside about Fabio Basili last year. You know, he's not even going to class, showing up late to practice, you know, kind of things that in a normal season, you would say that's like a cancerous attitude on the team. And I've heard a lot of similar things about Tyler Johnson, that not necessarily that he's a cancer, but it's a guy, you know, we're talking about foundational pieces, guys that are going to help you build the culture. And even though he's a fantastic player, I think a lot of what we're seeing with him coming off the bench, maybe not getting as many minutes, could be related to off the court issues. So, you know, that could be one where you look at a Mike James, like maybe he has a lower ceiling than a Tyler Johnson, but he brings infinitely more to the locker room, kind of like how like a Gorgie Zhang has been in the NBA. You know, a guy that he's going to be a leader in the locker room. He's going to do the right things. As Brandon Huntley Hatfield has said multiple times, that, you know, that's the only guy that beats him to the gym, right? Mike James is the only guy that gets there before him. He's the guy that puts in the work. He's the guy that leads by example. and he has a pretty solid attitude. I've been a bit confused with his play of late, just because, like you said, Jake, it seems like he was one of the top players in the country at drawing fouls. That's been his reputation. But lately, he's not getting those foul calls. And some of the shots, when they don't call it a foul, it ends up just looking like ridiculousness because the shot's going over the backboard. He's turning it over. He's just throwing it out of bounds. A lot of just empty possessions because those fouls aren't getting called. But I think that ultimately he lets that shake his confidence. And like everybody else on the team, when their confidence is starting to flounder on the offensive end, they let that fall over onto the defensive end like tenfold. So I think ultimately, it'll ultimately come down to the coaching staff. That's their job to make these decisions. But yeah, if you're making a foundational decision, like who are the cultural pieces that you keep to build the culture for the next staff, I feel like Mike James is definitely a name to be thrown out there. But overall, I think that Brandon Huntley Hatfield is the number one guy that you got to be focused on keeping, because number one, that's the guy that has shown the most growth, the most improvement. He's clearly the most talented player on the team. Well, when I mean talented, he has the most go-to moves on the offensive end. He's the most polished player so far. He's the guy that's bringing it the most on the defense. He's bringing the most consistently rebounding on both ends. There's a lot that he brings to the game, but also his attitude. When you look in Brandon Huntley Hatfield's eyes, obviously we're not looking directly into his eyes, but when we look at the way that he reveres the coaching staff, there is still a respect there from Brandon Huntley Hatfield, even through all this losing. He respects the hell out of the coaching staff. And I think that that's a great thing, number one. But I think number two, that could ultimately have to do with the coaching staff. Does he see Kenny Payne, Nolan Smith, Danny Manning, and the rest of the coaching staff as father figures, and in that sense want to follow them elsewhere? Could Brandon Huntley Hatfield, if Kenny Payne goes back to UK, is that a guy that could follow him there and be really successful at Kentucky? Those are the kind of questions that we'll have to answer over the next couple of months. But I think that he's a guy that's just locked in on what he's doing. When you watch him, Louisville could be down 20 at the end of the game, and he's giving it all. Like he's putting it all out there for you. I think over the last like 8 or 10 games, he's averaging like 17 and 10 or something crazy. Like he's been fantastic over the last 10 games or so. And really that's a higher compliment than you can pay to anybody else on the team, because you really haven't seen that consistency from anybody else, sans maybe Zan Payne. And again, we might owe an apology to Zan Payne because we've really just shit on him the entire season. And the one thing you can't say about Zan Payne at this point is that he tries, or that he doesn't try. He gives 100%. He's one of the only guys diving on the floor for balls. He's one of the only guys that's really making the effort to be in the right position on defense. Ultimately, he doesn't have the build or the athleticism or the skill set to match up with like the rest of the players on this team do. So ultimately, that's kind of what we're looking for as far as the roster. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know about you, Jake. I wouldn't be surprised if they just said, screw it. Let's just let's point everybody in a different direction. Let's just reset this thing. You're able to rebuild an entire team in the portal, and they could ultimately do so with a new coaching staff. Do you think there need to be some foundational pieces, or do you think that like the culture is so far gone that we shouldn't even worry about that right now and just let them go if the coaching staff believes that's the best decision?
Yeah, we were looking at I think we talked about it 2 episodes ago, maybe, the transfer portal team rankings in that top 10. It was some really good teams like UConn, St. John's was in there, TCU was in there. And I think the one thing I noticed was Arkansas was in there as well. The teams that get like 9+ transfers tend to struggle a little bit more because that's like complete roster overhaul. Just like no returning players really that contributed last year. But the teams that can add 5 or 6 guys to an already talented roster are the ones that do it the best, like a UConn or something like that. So I think ideally this team that we have has talent. They're not being coached appropriately or well by any means. But I think if you keep 4, max maybe 5 of these guys and bring in 6, 7 transfers, I think that's the best recipe for immediate success. I think if you lose 10 guys, 12 guys, and you're bringing in 9 to 12 brand new players, that's where it does start to get difficult. There's really no chemistry, and you really see teams struggle in year one. So I think ideally we keep 3 to 5 guys and we bring in 6+ transfers or high level recruits. I think ideally that's what you want.
It's got to be, unless it's a high 4-star or even 5-star talent. I think everybody else has to be transfers, because at this point, the way that people are succeeding in college basketball is by aging up, and then you use the younger players as pieces around them to supplement depth, to supplement talent, athleticism, that sort of stuff that you might not get from a more experienced player. So, and as we've mentioned, whoever comes in to the situation, there is a treasure trove of NIL money. I mean, we heard Eric Crawford say just yesterday on the radio that he knows for a fact that at least 2 people have donated a sum of $1 million for the 502 circle. I've heard numbers like $5-6 million, and that's about what it takes, right? If you want to compete with like the UConns, Kansas, Kentucky, those types of teams in terms of NIL, that's where you have to be. Got to be in like that $5-6 million range, because that's what these guys are going to be asking for. Not in a lump sum, but as a whole. That's about what your entire team is going to require. So it'll be kind of fascinating to watch. How is this roster constructed? I think there are some pieces that could be really solid on next year's team, but then you have to come in and do a recruiting job yourself. You have to sell the players that you want to keep on staying. And you also have to sell them on, there was a lot of a backlash that we talked about, like where why am I forgetting his name? The guy that's at Seton Hall killing it right now, Dre Davis. When you let a Tay Davis go, Dre Davis follows when Kenny Payne gets here. So now you put yourself in the situation where one of your best building block pieces is gone. So say you want to keep a Brandon Huntley Hatfield, you do this recruiting job, but Brandon says, I'm only staying if Sky Clark stays, for instance. What do you do in that instance? So there's going to be a lot of that back and forth behind the scenes, and it's probably going to move very quickly. That's the nature of the transfer portal. It's going to open here in about a week and a half, and the floodgates will probably open for Louisville, as will they for other teams. You're already seeing guys get into the portal. You're already seeing a number of teams. There's probably a dozen or two teams in college basketball that have already fired their coach to try to get a leg up on the competition. I think Louisville's, they're letting the time run out as we record this. 4 more days and 2 more games until we're finally done with the Kenny Payne era. But what that kind of leads into, and kind of just changing the topic just a little bit, is who will that next coach be? And we've heard a lot come out. We've heard a lot behind the scenes, but really for the first time, Drew Diener, 93.9, ESPN 680, 105.7, they basically came out and said, here's what we're hearing. Finally, the administration or whoever's on the inside is kind of letting this stuff get out. And the reports are that right now, if Louisville were to make a coaching hire, the ball is in Scott Drew's court. Scott Drew, of course, being the coach at Baylor, he took over one of the worst possible situations, has built Baylor into a basketball powerhouse, consistent top 25 team. I believe over the last 10 to 15 years, they've been ranked like 60%, 65% of the time. They won a national championship. Once again, this season, they are one of the favorites to win the national titles. So he's done a fantastic job there at Baylor. Probably the best coach that's gettable out there, right? Like, people, you could throw out a name like Dan Hurley, or you could throw out John Calipari, you could throw out Bill Self, or one of these teams at a really established power. But the reality is the most gettable coach out there, that's a great head coach that fits all of Louisville's needs, that checks all of the boxes, and that's affordable. You get Scott Drew. He would be the number one choice. From everything that we've heard, the ball is in Scott Drew's court. What's your take behind this? Do you think that there's a strategy behind Louisville letting this get out?
First off, excited. I think we've, along with a lot of people over the last 2 months, have been pretty clear Scott Drew would be our ideal hire. And so it is really nice to hear that the offer is in his hands and that Josh Hurd is like-minded like us and like a lot of fans, that Scott Drew would be the best man for this job. Whether he takes it, I don't know. I still don't feel great about it. Maybe 25-30% chance of him actually taking it, because he is in such a great situation at Baylor and he's been there for so long. But with all the rumors getting out, I'm curious. I feel like a lot of times when you hear these early rumors, probably a month before their season's over, it doesn't tend to end up being that guy. So that scares me a little bit. I'm guessing maybe Josh Hurd leaked. I mean, he had to have leaked it for a reason because he could have kept it quiet if he wanted to. Someone in the athletic department decided to let this news out. So I'm wondering if maybe they're trying to, I don't want to say pressure Scott Drew, because that's probably not the right term, but kind of let him know that a decision needs to be made because, and it doesn't have to be him outright saying tomorrow, I'm taking the Louisville job once this season's over. But I think Josh Hurd probably wants a handshake agreement behind closed doors that Scott Drew is going to be the guy once their season ends. Because if he's not, they can't just lay in waiting and wait till April 1st to come out whenever their season ends. You can't just sit back and wait and not have a plan in place. So I'm guessing Josh Hurd kind of let that news out to kind of pressure maybe a little bit Scott Drew into making a decision, letting him know, yes or no, I will be the next head coach. That's what I'm guessing. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. And I apologize for stepping away there. I heard the worst sound that every owner of a dog or a cat can hear, and that is the sound of throwing up. So we had to disappear for just a second. But no, I'm 100% in agreement with what you're saying. You can't wait. You can't just put all your eggs in one guy's basket and just and try to wait it out, because then what happens is all the other good candidates are either going to get swept up, they're going to sign new contracts. A lot of stuff's going to evolve over the next month, right? Say Dusty May makes another run in the NCAA tournament. He's going to be the hottest name out there. And so there's a lot to weigh. There's a lot to consider. One thing that I will say, I think that Scott Drew, in a perfect world, if everything lined up, I think that he would absolutely be just as interested in taking the job as Louisville is in courting him to take the job. I think that the number one factor, and this is completely different than probably any other coach that would be on this list, the number one factor is going to be his community that he's built and his faith-based beliefs. He's wrote a book about his faith. He is a huge, proponent of his church and his community and what he's built there in Waco. He is, what a Denny Crum type of guy would be to Louisville, right? He is kind of the godfather of Baylor basketball. They built an arena for this man, right? And so, well, I guess the way I'd put it is Baylor built an arena. He's responsible for them, making the adjustments to build for him. Do we really have to be chewing on my cord right now, man? I'm trying to make a point. No, so I think that's the number one thing. I've had a few conversations as well with people who are 100% in the know. From everything that I understand, the offer is on the table. Louisville's going to pay Scott Drew whatever the market dictates, whatever he's being asked of. I know that Baylor probably has the money as well, and there's other things to go into it. But ultimately, when you compare Louisville, the resources that we have, the fervor from the fan base and everything else that's involved, and then the NIL money that they can throw on top of that, he would have it made here as well. I think really the ultimate thing is going to be, he's had 3 children there. He got married in Waco, Texas. He's built a strong community. And when people say, well, Louisville has a high presence of Catholics and a bunch of Christian based churches and, a really welcoming community for any faith. I 100% agree with that. But for people who are heavy in their faith, I'm somebody who grew up, going to church twice a week for 20 years. As long as I was under my dad's roof, I was going to church. And like when I was an adult living in his house, I had to send him a picture of myself being at church. So I know how this works. I know, what people, especially of his ilk, believe. And I can assure you that he's built a community there where, he and his wife and their family and his kids, they all have relationships there in Waco. And I know his one daughter just went into college. He has 2 sons that are kind of ending their high school careers. So is it going to be something like, when Chris Mack came to Louisville, his daughters immediately fell in love with it and ultimately have stayed and finished out their high school tenures, their careers in Louisville. And will it be something like that? Is he okay with leaving his family behind for a couple of years and moving to Louisville? Is he okay with leaving his community, his church, and everything that comes along with that? I think that's something that people like him really value. The person that put out a video about, Baylor's one of only 3 schools in the country where you can have a Christian value based program. I definitely agree with that in a sense. I mean, they're a huge Christian school. So I agree with that in a sense, but I think he could implement similar values at Louisville and be completely fine. But that's not something to sneeze at either. And I think that's the point that people are trying to make, is that people have come after Scott Drew for the last 5-10 years, and he said no over and over again, right? And so I think that it ultimately comes down to, is Louisville the community that he finally jumps to? Is this the job that he's finally waiting for, or is he going to be like a Denny Crum when UCLA came calling and he told him no? You know, I've built this program. This is mine. It's solely mine. It's my baby. Why would I go? So that's ultimately my take on it, and my final opinion on Scott Drew as a coach coming to Louisville. If you don't hear anything, so if a Drew Diener or a Crawford or a Bozich or one of these journalists that are super connected, if you don't hear anything for the next week, say it's we're ending the ACC and Big 12 tournaments, and you still haven't heard anything about Scott Drew, that's enough, baby. If you still haven't heard anything about Scott Drew, then I think that's a good sign. But if he's truly not considering it, I think at some point the pressure will be on so much that he will have to come out and make a statement. You'll hear something from behind the scenes, something get leaked, or maybe an assurance for Scott Drew in the way of a contract extension of some sort. So, if Scott Drew gets a bag in the next week, if he comes out and makes a statement, I think that'll be very telling. But if we don't hear anything, if it's radio silence, and he does what a lot of these coaches do, where they come out and give very canned answers, very vanilla responses, I think that the hype will be at an all-time high. And if he ultimately came here, I mean, the clamoring and fervor from this fan base over the next 7-8 months will be out of this world. The recruiting and assembly of the roster, the assembly of the coaching staff the excitement will be at an all-time high, similarly to how it was for Louisville football. So that's kind of my take on Scott Drew. Any final thoughts on him before we move on to anything else?
I mean, just happy to hear it, that it is coming to fruition. What we wanted was our top guy getting that first offer. I think that's huge. I think that's huge for the fan base. If he does ultimately accept the job, I think it's also really big that with a name that he brings will also bring a little bit of patience, because it's not guaranteed. Even though we all know he's a great coach, it's not guaranteed that in year one, he's just going to boom, flip the switch, and we're going to be a 25-win team that's a top 4 seed, making it to the Sweet 16. And I think with a name like his, that allows the fan base to have a little bit more trust, a little bit more faith, to allow that second year to come in without pressure and allow him to build a little bit more than, say, a Josh Schertz, who not a lot of people know. I think he's a great coach, but if he comes in and struggles in year one, a majority of the fan base is going to be like, what the hell? Why do we hire this no name? This was such a bad idea. It'll kind of let the fan base be a little bit more patient. So I would love for it to happen. I'm excited to hopefully not hear anything else from Scott Drew.
Yeah. I think that's the best indicator of what's to come. Again, this stuff typically moves pretty fast. He's going to be badgered by reporters there in Waco, national reporters as he gets into the Big 12 tournament, as he gets into the NCAA tournament. There's going to be a lot of talk about this, and the longer he denies it and the longer other stuff doesn't come out, the better of a sign that is for Louisville. So we will probably find out something sooner rather than later, is my thought. What was also floated out there, 2 things. Number one, well, 3 things really. Number one, Chris Beard is not in consideration. We've said this from the beginning. I put this out on my personal account because I don't want to represent anybody else's opinions about this. But Chris Beard is not somebody that you take a chance on, because there's a million different reasons because of his off the court issues, the handling of those issues. But I could assure you from the jump, we've heard from multiple people behind the scenes, and the way that Josh Hurd spoke when he brought in Kenny Payne, there's a certain regiment, there's a certain criteria that you have to fit and hold yourself to a higher moral standard. And that was a big reason why he ultimately backed Kenny Payne, was because he brought this higher moral standard. And so to turn on that and immediately hire a guy that had that controversy at Texas, that was fired with cause because of happenings off the court, it would just make zero sense. And really, I mean, in my opinion, completely take away the faith from the fan base that Josh Hurd ultimately knows what he's doing. If he did that much of a 180 in over a two-year span. You go back and listen to that Kenny Payne introductory press conference. It was all about what he can bring to the table as far as restructuring Louisville's foundation, about, you know, what he brings as far as his leadership of young men, what he brings as far as his flawless reputation, you know, what other people say about him as a coach, as a teacher, as a leader. And so ultimately to hire somebody like Chris Beard, it would make zero sense. The one thing that was also said in the same conversation is that there's a number 2 guy that Louisville is very confident they can get. So if it's like a 25% chance, you have to, you know, really take a run at Scott Drew. There's another guy out there that there's like a 98% chance that he would accept the job if the timing and the money and everything else was right. Do you have any inkling of who that second person would be? Because there's been a lot of speculation out there.
I think the most obvious answer is Mick Cronin. I think he's the one coach that everyone in the kind of like the inner circle of Louisville knows that if he is offered the job, he's going to say yes. Is he that second pick? I don't know. To me, he still feels like a 4th, 5th, 6th pick. But maybe in Josh Hurd's mind, that is the number 2 pick. Maybe there's someone else out there that he knows with almost 100% certainty that he favors over Mick Cronin, would accept the job. But to me, if you're saying we've got a number 2 guy that we know will take the job, if we don't land Scott Drew, it's got to be Mick Cronin. And I don't love that. I think Mick Cronin is the most, I've said it before, meh hire you could make. Just very average. Wouldn't be awful, would certainly be an improvement over what we have right now. And I think he would build solid teams that would win, you know, 20 plus games a year, have us in the tournament consistently. But I don't know if he would be able to bring us back to what we were with Rick Pitino, constantly top 10 teams, making Final Four runs consistently, always being a team that is considered a national champion contender. So that's kind of my fear. I ran a poll yesterday on my Twitter and just basically asked, if Mick Cronin ends up being the coach, how would you feel? Gave out 4 options: home run hire, solid second choice, meh, or anyone but Mick. You want to take a guess as to which of those 4 options won out?
I think it was probably meh, if I had to guess.
It was meh with 43.6% of the vote. And then there 24% said anyone but Mick. So that's obviously a small sample size, 200, but that's 70% of people that voted feel like Mick is an okay to bad hire. So that's kind of I'm more in the okay hire boat when it comes to how I feel about him. So I'm hoping that's not the second guy. But to me, if you're asking who is that solid second choice that Louisville feels like they have, it's Mick Cronin.
My response to that, first of all, would be this: that you have to, when you're assessing the situation, I think the number 1 question that you have to ask overall, or one of the, if it's not one, it's 1A. The number 1 question that you would ask is, can this guy win a national championship? And when I look at Mick Cronin, my confidence that he is leading Louisville to a national championship, multiple national championships, even Final Fours, anything of that nature, I don't have high confidence that that's the case. I mean, you have about 20 years of experience from Mick Cronin, and I jokingly referred to him as mid Cronin, or he would bring us March Midness, because I just don't think that he's the guy that ultimately can get Louisville over that hump. And at Louisville, there's an expectation. You go to like Sweet 16 is the bare minimum. You go to Elite Eight, you go to Final Fours, you win national titles. That's the expectation at Louisville. And so when you look at his ceiling, I think that his ceiling is what you indicated, Jake. I don't think that Mick Cronin would come in here and they would have I think his floor is what you're seeing at UCLA this season, right? I think you're seeing, my goodness, they're just going crazy back here. I think what you're seeing right now at UCLA is the bottom of the barrel for Mick Cronin, and he's complained a lot about them not having enough NIL support, this, that, and the other. The fan support is not quite at UCLA what it is at Louisville. There's so many other things going on in that area that they're like the 8th or 9th thing for somebody to watch. When you got the Lakers and the Clippers and the Dodgers and And I'm trying to think of what else they have there. I mean, they have 2 MLS teams. Like, there's so much more to do, and it's Los Angeles. Like, it's one of the biggest countries in the city, or in the one of the biggest cities in the country. And so, number one, I think that, you know, I think that he would want to come to Louisville. I think there's that connection there. I think there is, a desire to maybe return somewhere on the East Coast. However, I have that concern with, I don't think that he's the guy that just comes in and makes this huge cultural shift. He's not a super likable guy. He's not a guy that's like super endearing to fans. He's the guy that's always whining to coaches and that sort of stuff. Louisville also hired a guy like from the other side of his rivalry and Chris Mack, and had very similar results with Mack. He just feels like Mick Cronin feels like another hiring of Chris Mack just a few years down the road. And I'm not sure that that's ultimately what we're looking for. And then, of course, there's the buyout as well. He has a very public contract. His buyout is going to be $16 million as of April 1st, I believe. And we've heard, and we'll get into this in a little bit, that, the buyout for Scott Drew looks like it's about $9.5 million. The buyout for a guy like Nate Oates looks like it's about $10 million. And that feels like that's like the max that Louisville can pay. So when you're talking 16 million, that's a whole other year plus of a coaching contract that you're paying out essentially. And does Louisville have that money? I mean, we've been over this before. As of right now, it doesn't appear that they do. I've heard a lot of loud rumblings and rumors that Louisville has some boosters that have agreed to pony up and pay Kenny Payne's buyout. So at least we're not dealing with that aspect of it. But $16 million is unprecedented. Hell, $9 million would be unprecedented in college basketball. We see these crazy college football buyouts. You saw what happened at Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher. They paid him like some ungodly amount of money to leave Texas A&M. But this is college basketball. The budgets are a little bit tighter. Those numbers would just not make any sense. And ultimately, if you're talking about paying a coach, what the market value for their job is, what's the value of a coach in the ACC? What's the value of a coach that is expected to win national championships? What's the value of a coach of their ilk, as I would say? Ultimately, I don't think that when you look at Mick Cronin, that he's a guy that's worth a $16 million buyout. And then on top of that, having a $5.5 to $6 million a year contract. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So unless there's some sort of loophole, as has been indicated by the BBH guy, which that's the only thing that I've seen, I don't see how that's feasible. So that's the other thing I get into. To me, and what has been thrown out by Eric Crawford is that he was told that it's somebody of a Dusty May type of level, if you will, a guy that's at a quote unquote lower level school, but has had success at that school. And so I don't know if it's specifically Dusty May. To me, that's the guy that probably makes the most sense. And I think that really, Lulu, I think that if there is a guy that makes the most sense in that range, that's like a automatic hire, I think to me it's Dusty May. It's Amir Abdul Rahim. It's our guy. I can't think of his name off the top of my head at South Carolina. I think that
Lamont Paris. Thank you. Always forget his name. So yeah, I think it's a guy more in that range, but I do see, it feels like, and Jacob texted me this like almost every day. He's like, dude, I just have this like weird, strange feeling that it might be Mick. Like, I just have this odd feeling that I don't know, man. That's just a hire. Like, there's probably 20 other names that I feel like I get more excited about than Mick Cronin. And that's what bothers me. Like, I feel like if it's Mick Cronin, I feel like I just want my focus to go to football or women's basketball or something. And that's not to say that he couldn't, I mean, there's plenty of coaches that nobody thought that they could until they did. So I'm not saying that necessarily, but when I look at what the ultimate goal is for Louisville, what the standard is here, I don't know if Mick's the guy. I really don't. Yeah, he's not the only Jacob at the state of Louisville that fears that it's Mick Cronin. I feel like every day that goes by, every Twitter rumor, every sports radio show I listen to, it feels more and more likely that it is Mick. I will say, I don't think that technically means Mick was the pick. Clearly, he is not the pick. The pick is Scott Drew. Now, whether or not he accepts it is a completely different thing. But he was never Josh Hurd's first pick. I don't even think it's going to be his second or third pick, honestly. If Nate Oates didn't have a $10 million buyout, I feel like it would probably be Nate Oates if money was not an object or anything. So to me, Mick was never the pick. He just might end up being the guy we end up hiring. But like you said, I'd rather go with the home run hire, the Scott Drew, pay the $10 million for Nate Oates, whatever it is, the guy you know for sure. Or I'd rather go with a potential up and coming guy like a Josh Schertz or an Amir Abdur-Rahim, who has that potential to be the next great head coach in college basketball that can be our coach for 20, 30 plus years that we discovered first, kind of like we did with Denny Crum.
Yes.
And to me, Mick Cronin is just so in the middle. I was looking at it, out of the 20 years he's been coaching, I think he's made the tournament 15, 16 times out of that, which is good, which is solid, but he's made it past the Sweet 16 only 4 times. And like you said, the Sweet 16 is our standard. So if he's reaching the Sweet 16 20% of the time, that's not going to do it. He'll coach well enough to maybe not get fired immediately. He'll get us to tournaments, but I don't think he's ever going to bring us to the level that we are hoping this next coach can do.
I have this fear, and look, fans are going to be excited if you get back to, anything close to the standard at this point, right? Like we've fallen so far, like 12 wins in 62 games. Like that was unimaginable. It took Rick Pitino, almost 12 years to lose that many games. So it's just, we've gone to unimaginable, unfathomable places in the last 2 years, and we're down that bad. But there will become this restlessness, similar to how it is at Kentucky, right? There would be a restlessness if you hire a guy who is continuing to just be a 4 or 5 seed in the ACC tournament, who's continuing to be like a 5 or 6, 7 seed in the NCAA tournament, and who's not making it to the second weekend very often. And ultimately, once you get back to that standard, you still have to uphold that coach to that standard. Kenny Payne is so far removed from that it's hard to really fathom even getting upset about that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you still have to hold them to the standard of the program and look at what the foundation is at Louisville. And the foundation of Louisville is you have top 10 facilities. You have a top 10 fan base and support. You have the most money as far as income coming in. You have, a top 10 NIL collective. You have all of the resources and then the history of the program. You have a top 10 probably history of the program as well. And so when you look at all of that and you look at the foundation, you have to bring in a guy that can take those tools and turn this into a winning product right away. And to me, I have so many qualms with Mick. Another guy that we probably want to get into, and that's been kind of our number one most feasible hire for a while, but apparently it's getting shot down. It's Eric Musselman. What are your thoughts on Eric? Because you're the guy that's really been leading the charge as far as you really think that he's the best fit as far as recruiting, as far as excitement around the program, as far as having that ability to go deep in March. What are your thoughts on Musselman?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, before we truly, the last 2 weeks have gotten fully into coaching search time, to me, it was Eric Musselman. I mean, obviously Scott Drew was still my number one, but when I viewed it as like a 70 to 80% chance he doesn't take the job, Eric Musselman made the most sense because of that $750,000 buyout, because of his proven success at Nevada and at Arkansas, because he can dominate the transfer portal, kill it in the recruiting class. To me, he made the most sense, but I haven't heard a thing. I don't know if he's not being considered at all, but nobody's really talking about him. And maybe that's a good thing because we're still probably a few weeks out from hiring a guy. Maybe under the table, that's what we really want. And I would love that. I think he'd be a great name to get, but it's definitely odd that we've heard about Scott Drew. We've heard about Nate Oates. We've heard that Chris Beard's on the table. We've heard about Mick Cronin. We've heard about Billy Donovan of all people, but we haven't heard a single thing about Eric Musselman. So I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that he's a secret name that just maybe Josh Hurd hasn't released, and that's the guy that he wants. But it is definitely strange, and I'm losing more and more faith as time goes on and we don't see him being brought up at all.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been this back and forth. I think that Eric Crawford, more than anybody, is a guy that's in the know. He's been around Louisville, around the program for so long, covering the program at such a a great consistency. And he always puts into perspective what we're trying to say as fans. So I really love his work. I love following his career. I love what he brings to the table. And I think that he has probably the best quote unquote sources of anybody. He's one of the most connected people in the city. So I respect that a lot. And he also has been great at being responsive to fans on social media. And so when people are asking, do we think it's Nate Oates? He's been like, I don't think it's Oates. I just think that the buyout's too high. I just don't think that's not a name I've heard. And he said the same thing about Musselman. People have been asking over and over, what about Eric Musselman? And he says that he doesn't think that's a name that's being considered at this point. Again, he is not in the meeting rooms. He doesn't know everything that's going on. Josh Hurd and Louisville's administration as a whole, Josh Hurd is the figurehead of this program, but a lot of this stuff gets out because of others within the program. And Louisville, since Tom Jurich has been gone, has been really good about just being very tight-lipped on this kind of stuff. So I think you are right, Jake, in a sense that, maybe, he lets this stuff get out on purpose. And there could be a guy like Eric Musselman that they consider. I don't think it's off the table, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like it has a lot of juice. That disappoints me a little bit because going back to Nevada, he was always a guy that I think Louisville fans, Louisville bettors, people who follow college basketball as a whole, liked watching Nevada. I like those teams that he put together then. And he did a great job of assembling players the old school way through the transfer portal and building the program. He brought an excitement to Nevada. I mean, Nevada of all places. That was fantastic. And I really like what he's done at Arkansas. I mean, and hell, he beats Kentucky a lot. He does a great job of being super competitive with them as well. So, there's a lot to like there. I think we should just put a bookmark right there. Just leave that where we left off, and we'll see. We'll check back in a week. Heard any more Eric Musselman rumors, anything like that? Right now, it is radio silent in the Eric Musselman department. I do think that he's a guy that would take the job, and I think that he's a guy. It sounds like the writing is on the wall that neither he nor Arkansas are happy with each other. So that could be something where there's potential that if I've heard Arkansas insiders as well say that, even if he doesn't go to Louisville, he may be looking for a job elsewhere. Ohio State, one of these other, kind of bigger name Power 6 type of jobs. So that would be something that's interesting to watch as well. One thing that you did mention that would be, I mean, this would be the absolute home run hire. This would trump anything else out there. And that's Billy Donovan. And Drew Diener came out, and obviously this was maybe the most fascinating part of the discussion, right? Drew Diener came out and said that he's heard that, don't rule out Billy Donovan. Like, even though he's been out of basketball for 10 years. And I know our buddy Matt McGavick and a few others have come out and said they don't feel like he'd be a good fit. And the other thing too is that they don't see any reason why he would leave the NBA. However, if it's being floated out there, there's at least some sort of interest in Billy Donovan. And I mean, he's not only would be one of the best coaches in college basketball. He's one of the best coaches in the league right now. He was the coach of the year when he took over for the Bulls in 2020. He had a great stretch in 2015 to 2019, 2020 season with Oklahoma City. They went to the playoffs every single season at Oklahoma City. And ultimately, the only reason he didn't end up staying there was contract negotiations. They just couldn't find the right fit for them to continue that relationship. Now, if he leaves the Bulls, I'm sure there's a lot of NBA teams that would come calling as well. Everybody remembers that situation back when he was at Florida. He accepted the job for the Orlando Magic, and then like a day or two later, just walked it back and said, never mind, I'm not going there. I changed my mind. So that's an interesting to watch just because Billy Donovan is one of the best coaches on planet Earth. So regardless of level, he would be an absolute fantastic home run hire. He had the connection with Rick Pitino at Louisville, so I don't know if that makes any difference. But then you have Josh Hurd, who has the connection with Jay Wright, who he's probably using those connections and those inroads to try to make something like that happen. But to hear that Billy Donovan, if you put a number on it, 20-1, 30-1, that's a lot better odds than what I think anybody would have thought. And people have always joked, it's like he's the type of guy that people have always joked like, oh, I heard Billy Donovan's looking for a house in Louisville, because it felt like an unrealistic hire, right? This is a guy that went to 4 Final Fours at Florida, of all places, won back-to-back national championships at Florida. He was a fantastic coach in college, has done the same thing, only built his resume in the NBA. And he's a guy, if you come to a place like Louisville, you have to deal with less of the whole, managing the roster and more just managing the personalities than you do almost anywhere else in the country with the backing that Louisville has as far as, again, the foundation, the boosters, the NIL, all of that. Thoughts on Billy Donovan?
Billy Donovan to Louisville is kind of similar to what Brad Stevens is to Indiana. Every time they have a hire, people in the background are like, oh, Brad Stevens, he'd be a great hire. So would Billy Donovan. But the odds of him leaving the NBA, I think, are 5%. I mean, the Bulls are mediocre right now. They'll probably get a play-in game spot. Even if he gets fired this year, he'll get another job in the NBA if he wants it. So it would be surprising to me if he decided to take it. Maybe the cards are lining up. Maybe everything's falling into place that he's going to lose his job with the Bulls and this Louisville job is open. It's the first time that his career path has lined up with Louisville's coaching opening. So maybe that's the case. And if he comes here, I don't really have a doubt in my mind. I mean, the only fear is that it's been 10 years since he's been in college basketball, and the college basketball landscape has changed tremendously. There was no transfer portal, or there was, but it was maybe one guy a year, and he's got to sit out for you. So how good of players are you getting? So, I mean, the landscape that he'd be coming into would be incredibly different, but he was an amazing recruiter at Florida. He took Florida to places they've never been before and haven't been since he left. So, I mean, to me, he's a no doubt, no brainer. If Scott Drew says no, I'd be just as happy, just as thrilled to have Billy Donovan. I don't want to get too excited, nor do I want really anyone to get too excited about it. But it is interesting to hear that name thrown out there as a possibility.
Yeah, man. I mean, so you look at Billy Donovan's contract with the Bulls right now, 4 year, $24 million. So quick math, that's what, $6 million a year. That's about what he would demand at the college level. So it's not like it's unrealistic from a money perspective. I don't buy out to deal with from the Bulls. I could be totally way off base with that, but I don't think it works like that quite as much in the NBA. The coaching situation is so volatile. I mean, you had, what was it, the coach of the Raptors won the championship a few years ago and they got fired the next year. Like, so that it's very apparent in the NBA that while coaches are valued, especially a top tier, top name coach that's been in the business for so long, they are highly valued. They're just seen as commodities, just like any other player would be in the league. Whereas in college basketball, coaches are, I mean, look at how Pitino and Crum were at Louisville. They were revered for their abilities, their coaching abilities in college. The other thing that I would weigh as Billy Donovan's moving towards more of a retirement age, maybe he wants to have a landing spot where he's familiar with the program, familiar with the city, has connections here. He's familiar with the college game. He's familiar with how that works. And I don't want to say that there's less work to be done, but look, in college you play a maximum of 40 games. In the NBA, if you go into the playoffs, you're playing 90 games a season, and it's coming so quick, right? Like it's so 3-4 games per week. You have pretty much no control over who ultimately ends up on your roster. Whereas in college, you can build your roster. The goal coming from the NBA to college may feel a bit more attainable. And as you're going into, a retirement age, I know these guys live and breathe basketball and that's what they love to do. But, you could be looking at something that is quote unquote less work if you go back to college, just because you play, a third of the games. And the way that college works now, it's very similar to how it is in professional basketball. Pieces are moving in and out on a yearly basis. The transfer portal utility that comes with that is greater than ever. So that's something that I've had in the back of my mind as well since we've heard the name Billy Donovan connected to Louisville, even as little of a chance as there is. I do think a NBA coach coming back to college, I mean, it's been done before at Louisville, right? I mean, Rick Pitino coming from the Knicks, coming back to Louisville. So I absolutely think that there are guys who have a passion for the college sport in general. And, if people are saying don't rule it out, again, just like the Scott Drew thing, like if this thing has any legs to it and you don't hear anything the next few months, I mean, maybe it's a possibility. I mean, truly, maybe it is.
And one thing I wanted to bring up, you talked about his age, 58 years old. It kind of hit me why Musselman might not be considered like we want him to be is his age, though he appears to me like he's in his upper 40s, lower 50s. He's 59. So, I mean, maybe that is something Josh Hurd is considering, that even if we hire Musselman, we're getting 10 years out of him, probably, maybe a few more maybe 12 years, but you're not getting that 20 years like you could have with Rick Pitino, 30 years like Denny Crum, whatever it is. So maybe that's something that he's considering. And Mick Cronin is only 52. So that's 7 years
Yeah.
less than
And
what Musselman is. So maybe there's something in the back of his head that's telling him that when he makes this hire, he wants it to be the next coach at Louisville for 20 plus years and not 10 plus years. So maybe that's something he's considering. With the hole that we're in right now, I think getting an immediate fix like a Musselman that could turn us around in 1 year and give us 10 great years is worth it. But maybe that's something in the back of his head.
yeah, Scott Drew, by the way, is 53. And then some of these other coaches like Amir Abdul Rahim, Abdir, man, that is a mouthful. Just call him AAR. He's in his 40s, I believe. You have a guy like Dusty May, who's younger as well. I believe he's in his 40s as well. So, something to consider. And then the name that we haven't talked about again very much, TJ Otzelberger. He is I believe in his early 40s. I'd have to look that up as well. But there are a lot of names that you're right. If you want to have a guy come here for 20, 25 years, he's got to be like in his early 50s, late 40s. If you want to have a guy retire here, make this his home, turn this into, make him the next guy that has a legacy and puts banners in the rafters and stuff. You got to have a guy that wants to stay here for a couple of decades. And so, yeah, that could be something that factors in as well. So it is, as far as the coaching search, I think that's all that we have for now. One thing that you had in the notes that I thought was interesting that we could get into just a little bit is Kenny Payne a plant? Is he a UK plant? What's your take? I'll just leave it at that. Is Kenny Payne a UK plant? Go.
The evidence continues to mount that this man was secretly put into this program by the University of Kentucky, similar to the board of trustees that we had that was littered with UK fans and UK alums. I mean, from the fact that he's been the worst coach that any major college basketball team has ever seen is obviously the most damning evidence that we've seen, or the fact that the story came out that while he was at Louisville as a player, he pushed players like Rex Chapman to UK, or he's came out and said that, oh, he's a Wildcat. He's not a Louisville guy. To bringing on, paying recruits to come in like Joe Son, or however you say his name, to appear for 45 minutes in a Louisville jersey to then drive an hour up the road to go watch UK play at home. I mean, the evidence just keeps mounting that, like, what the hell is going on? Like, was this dude here to just destroy our program? I mean, my rational side of me thinks no, but the more you see, and I'm curious, once he does get relieved of his job, what else comes out? It's like, Jesus Christ. I mean, like, I heard recently that L. Ellis, his dad, came out and spoke about really the main reason he left Louisville wasn't because of playing time, wasn't because he didn't think he was a point guard. It was the fact that he didn't believe that these were good coaches. Like, he thought this was a coaching staff that could not make him improve, could not make him be the best player that he could be. So if that's what they're doing, if that's what's going on here, I mean, this is just probably not correct. But part of me is like, what the fuck is going on here? Is this actually true? Because the more that comes out, the more you're like, maybe it is true. Maybe he was a UK plant this whole entire time. It's a conspiracy theory, but it's gaining more validity in my mind.
It's a conspiracy theory that I'd like to at least consider. I mean, you go to like Aaron Bradshaw and DJ Wagner. You look at Carter Knox. All these guys are guys that they visited Louisville because of their relationship with the staff, right? But they didn't visit Louisville because of their interest in Louisville necessarily. And then, I mean, Carter Knox was another player that came to Louisville and did the whole photo shoot thing for an hour, got a picture with Kenny, posted a selfie, and then he's off to actually watch real basketball being played in Lexington and go on like a real true visit to the school. So I mean, there's everybody, was out there saying, Kenny drove him to Lexington and all that stuff, which is probably not true. But I mean, it's pretty. It's not that there's evidence that he is a quote unquote plant or anything like that, but it's the fact that he never tried to stop this stuff. He's and it's not that I don't want to get into the whole he's a good guy and all that stuff, but like he has no problem with if a player doesn't want to play with him, he's like, well, I mean, Coach Calipari, I love him, look at him like a father, he could totally go there. But I mean, it's little stuff like, he's on the airplane coming to Louisville to meet with the media, and he's wearing, Nike gear, or he's going out to recruit guys. He's not wearing Louisville stuff. And it's like, it's just little stuff like that like when you're not successful, it starts to stand out. Like you want a guy that's going to ride or die for the university. You want a guy that, if he's going to make an effort to win, like you want him to be all in. Like Kenny Payne's a guy that never made adjustments. Like, he won 4 games in a season. Like it's standard practice for Louisville basketball to start out 10-1 or 12-2 or something like that. Like that is standard practice just to win all of these bye games, essentially, to start the season, to beat the bottom dwellers of your conference. And if they don't, then it's a massive red flag. And the coaches are immediately making adjustments. They're immediately playing Zan Payne and Danilo Jovanovic and Aiden McCool and whoever else to prove a point. And Kenny's never done any of that stuff. He just puts them out there, and then he puts his hands up in the air and says, oh, they got to fight more. They got to do this or that. There's never any X's and O's talk about, why is stuff not getting through to players? Why, is Louisville not finding success in certain areas? There's never been, and if the fans can't see it and Kenny can't answer to it, how are the players supposed to be expected to buy into a system that nobody knows what's going on? Like, it's very apparent at this point, the players are kind of have resigned to the fact that Kenny's going to leave, no matter how much they say that they like him. They've resigned to that fact, and they're not listening. Like they everybody's just buying time until the season's over. They're just playing the games because they're on the schedule and they're contractually obligated to show up and play the games. But at this point, there's no quality product being put on the floor. There's no changes that we're attempting to make. And so ultimately, I don't think he's a plant put there by UK, but the results are pretty damning. And everything that led to Kenny Payne being the coach at the University of Louisville, even from the start of his tenure, where he's wearing Nike gear and he's telling everybody, I need your help. I need your help. I need your help. I need you guys to be patient. Yes, the writing was on the wall, essentially, when he came out and just straight up said that he feels like he's cleaning up a mess of a program, which is just an unequivocally false statement. It's just a bold-faced lie. He's on the wall when he says that he didn't realize that people were going to talk bad about him when he was the head coach. Like, of course, negative recruiting. I guarantee you that Kenny used negative recruiting when he was at Kentucky. And if he didn't, I'm sure that John Calipari or anybody else on that coaching staff was sure as hell using negative recruiting. That's how the business works, man. Like, you're not only selling your program, but you're selling to these kids why your program is superior to these other programs. Kenny, and everything that you hear, everything that you see, everything that he says, that's never something that he has been willing to do is go to bat for Louisville. He said that people had to convince him to come here, and there were coaches, there were, his friends and coaches and players like Purvis Ellison that just straight up came out and said, he told Kenny not to take the job. There are a lot of people that said, don't do this. And so he almost felt like he was like forced to, like he was dragged to the program to be some savior. And the reality is, he wasn't cut out for the job. He wasn't cut out for the media side of things. He wasn't cut out for what it takes to be, the leader of a group of men. He was never cut out for, everything that goes into being a Louisville basketball head coach, let alone the aspect of having to script a game plan, to have to scout for other players. That's never anything that's happened. And as disappointing as it is, as disheartening as it is, it's also just makes you angry and makes you just excited that this pain is almost over. I mean, that's really the reality of the situation. Before we get out of here, any other comments on KP and the situation as a whole?
Yeah, the more you brought it up, the more I was thinking, like, he's with this whole is he a UK plant thing. He's brought and played some of the, at least in my experience, I was born in 96, the least talented players I've ever seen.
Right.
Don a Louisville uniform, like Karan Davis, Fabio Basili, Danilo Jovanovic, Emmanuel Okorafor. Like these are some of the least, maybe great people, but least talented players to ever play basketball for Louisville. So just it adds to my conspiracy theory brain that he might be a UK plant. Other thing, before we get out of here, I want to say we've talked about him before, but 2 names to keep an eye on during March that could rise up the board, could become that next Dusty May. Josh Sturts at Indiana State and Amir Abdur-Rahim, AAR, at University of South Florida. 2 guys that if their teams continue to play the way they are, 2 top 25 ranked teams, and they make it to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, the Final 4, they could be guys that you're looking at being like, holy crap, these are the next up. And so just keep an eye on Indiana State, keep an eye on South Florida. Josh Schertz has Indiana State, #1 team in the Metro Valley right now. They've got a really fun team. We talked about it last podcast. Really great offense, really fun to watch. Amir Abdur-Rahim took USF, who had won, I think, 22 games in the 2 years before him. They've already won 24 games in his first year. So if those 2 dudes make deep runs in March, which USF for sure is going to get into the tournament, and I think Indiana State will, especially if they win the Metro Valley, they'll get the auto bid, but I think they could still get an 11 seed as well. Those 2 guys I want to keep an eye on as potential coaching names that will rise up the board as March goes on.
Yeah, and I can't get that song out of my head. Amir Abdur-Rahim, like the Lil Dicky song. But yeah, anyways, that's about all we have for right now. The next time we talk to you, there is a very, very good chance that Kenny Payne will not be the head coach at the University of Louisville. And for that, we are grateful. Good riddance, good luck, and wherever life takes you. And then maybe we can get back to the he's a good guy conversation. But for now, that's about all we got. Make sure you drink your Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon, and make sure wherever you're listening to this, make sure you subscribe to us. The more subscribers we have, the more ratings that we have, the more we can provide content. And this will get better. There will be less dogs in the background as we move forward. But until next time, Starting 502 Podcast. Let's get out of here and go Cards.
Go Cards.